Good evening, gentlemen. It's now 5:30, it's Thursday, November the 16th, 2017. I call this San Juan Economic Development Corporation meeting to order. First item on the agenda is our roll call. I'll start on my right.
Jose Perez, Director.
Eddie Garcia, Vice President.
Jesse Ramirez, ex officio.
Ruben Navarro, board member.
Aaron Garza, Board Member. Jennifer, City Manager.
Fred Rodriguez, Secretary. Israel Garza, Treasurer.
Arturo Plaza, board member. Public comments, number 2, public comments. Anybody here ready for public comments?
So we excuse Pedro Contreras for being late. I think he's running late or not coming.
No, I think we decided a couple of meetings back there.
Oh, we don't have to.
We don't do it anymore.
Sorry.
It'll be on the record.
Question, with all due respect, Mr. Valo, you said board member. No, sir, you are president.
President, I'm also board member.
Just want to make sure we have your title.
Public comments, anybody ready for public comments? Nope. Then we'll move on to number 3, our minutes. There are attached in your packet. You all had an opportunity to review the minutes. If you have any questions or concerns about them.
I just wanted to make a clarification on that, Mr. President. On the one that was tabled before, or no action taken, the attorney and the staff thought there was no action taken. One of the board members thought he had made a motion and we had tabled it. We went back and checked the video, and he did make a motion, but it was never seconded, and the discussion continued, and at the end of the discussion, there was a discussion about no action taken. That's what we all wrote down, no action taken. So it was not taken.
What item is that?
The September 27 minutes where it says no action taken on 17. The first set of minutes.
Oh, I got you.
We did go back and check it.
Okay. Any other corrections to our minutes? Comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes. Have a motion?
Second.
A second to accept the minutes as presented. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. For the record, Pedro Contreras is now present with us, and our board members, welcome, sir.
Thank you. Excuse me for my hurry.
Our next item on the agenda is number 4, our director's report. Mr. Cueva?
The written report is in your packet. Do you have any questions on anything specific in there?
Question, I shot my glass, but I'm not sure, I know it's in the, there was a question there about, on the project with Lexus, on your report you put about some questioning under, is that holding up anything on our end of it? Something about some drain pipes or?
No, that's continuing.
So that's not gonna.
This is a copy of the director's report.
It's up for the minutes.
Yeah, I don't have my, I have a different one.
You have a different one?
Want to get him a copy?
Aquí lo hay, it's in here, it's here.
November the 16th, 2017, director's report is its title.
It's after the minutes, Mr. Gonzalez.
It's right before the notice of the bus. Just to answer your question, no, there was some discussion about some pipelines that were installed by the subcontractor for Spalglass. That's been settled to the city's satisfaction, but I believe they issued a letter of compliance or something like that on how it was installed, so that's not an issue.
That's on number 10 on your report, right?
Yes.
You're basically just telling us what's, I mean, you want to elaborate, or you want us just to read it, or how do you?
Well, normally it's just a brief summary of some of the things that happened during the last month. If you don't have any questions on anything specific, since our attorney had said that we couldn't discuss anything that was not on the agenda, so.
I met with Mr. Rosler, representative, behind the number 6, so what's the progress on that? Do we have that on the agenda today or not?
We had a couple of meetings on that. Mr. Basilko was gonna meet with us in Dallas, and he didn't make the trip. And, I've called him twice, he was in Mexico City. At this point, we're still trying to follow up and see what's gonna happen now that, the city has approved the ordinance on the car washes. But we've heard that he may be having second thoughts about the car wash, I'm not sure yet.
There was also a concern about a right-of-way or an easement from the irrigation district.
His engineer Julio Serra is working on that for him. Along the front entrance from Nebraska, apparently they have to get an easement from the irrigation district because they're claiming it's not an easement, it's, they own
We couldn't find it. We looked, our records, it would have to be recorded, so we'll have to.
And that's saying, that's on Raul Longoria or on Frontage?
it. Yes, on the roadway.
It runs all the way.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on director's report?
Yes, Mr. President, here we're number 4, I attended city commission meeting. It's my understanding that there was a budget presented to the city commission this last meeting.
Yes, sir.
Was there any particular reason why we didn't review what you presented before you presented it?
That's the budget that you all approved in August.
So the budget from back in August,
Yes.
when we were at the library?
No, you all approved the budget, we sent it to City Hall for the city council action. But this board reviewed it and passed it.
Well, one of the things that I have concerns with is I would have really appreciated that we had reviewed what you were gonna present. So you're telling me that exactly what was approved back in August is exactly what was presented to the commission?
Yes, sir.
I understood there were some questions and concerns in reference to the budget. Can you share that with us?
Is this the same one that went to the city? This is a different one.
That's the expenditure report done by the city for us. It's a one-page budget.
Do you have a copy of the budget you presented to the city?
Would that be part of, that for the longest time that Mr. Garza was kept hold on and working?
Well, that's a different issue. The budget it's a one-page issue that we budgeted $878,000, and it shows revenues and it shows the debt service. That was a budget that you all approved in August. And that's why, I don't know if I have my packet that was approved sometime back.
Is that the budget that I've asked that needs to be updated according to expenditures and according to changes and according to, and we visited the budget before. The one item that I recall is, one time you put it on the agenda for us to review and you had made some changes. Some of our concerns were, you put the whole budget for approval, but you never highlighted exactly which item you had increased or decreased according to your request. And it was a little difficult for us to search through the whole presentation. It would have been easier if you would have highlighted, but is that what you're talking about?
No, that was when we amended the budget.
It was an
at
amendment.
the end of last year's budget. This is the budget for this fiscal year. It's a one-page document you all adopted in August.
You have it?
Martha went to get it, I don't have it working here.
Was it the time when you came in and it was kind of like a long meeting and we went through the budget?
I'm trying to recall.
We were all put together and we were like,
I remember going over a budget when we were at the library.
That's the one I recall.
that's the one I recall, but I just know that it was like so much for this, so much for that.
Usually I keep pretty much.
But they should have something in file with that.
Not only that, but there should be minutes that this.
It's in the minutes. This is the budget that was approved by the board, and it says it was approved August 31st, 2017, at the meeting at Mr. Quorum was present. That's the one-page document we're presenting.
I'm guessing I was not present. This is the first thing I see.
You see this, bro?
I don't remember.
This is what you gave the city?
Yes, sir, that's the budget you all approved.
Did they approve it?
No, sir, there was no action taken because they had some questions on it. I want to submit some additional information.
I think they were asking.
Yeah, one more,
breakdown.
yeah, more breakdown, it was just like, do, like.
Salaries,
like,
150
you wanna know more
overtime.
detail, what it meant, also, like, what do you need?
So with that said, I guess it would be important for you to share that with the board on your next trip before you go over there and explain to us before you submit something to the city. What you're gonna submit.
That meeting happened this week, that's why it's on the report, the report went out last week. So this means, that meeting happened after we did the report and put it in your packet.
But this is kind of, like, the whole no. I mean, one page here, it doesn't really tell you too much of what you wanna do, so.
I guess they were asking more for itemized,
A more detailed report about this.
Yes. That problem, I told the city council I would come back on the agenda and give them more information. But this is the budget that was put on our agenda here at your board meeting, and you all approved.
Can you provide those minutes?
Yes, we'll get them for you.
Like, you don't have them file anywhere where you can just show us, because I normally, thanks to these iPhones and smartphones, smarter than me, I enter my date and meetings, and I don't have a meeting for August 31st, at least in my calendar. I don't know if anybody does, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only
August
one.
the
that enters
31st?
Meetings in their phones.
Right here, we only have October, the first one we have, all the way through September. On this,
August 31st was on a Thursday. It was,
It was the fifth week of August.
you see on that, please?
I have the minutes here in the back of my binder here, and presidents were Eddie Garcia, Jesse Ramirez, Martha Pennington, Ruben Navarro, Aaron Garza, Ben Arjona, Fred Rodriguez, Isabel Garza, Gilbert Vasquez, and Arturo Harvard Jr. And this was when, it says Pedro Contreras, board member absent, deployed to Houston.
That's what I have here.
But it's in the minutes.
You guys remember this?
so are we okay with that before he submits the next one, he should present it to us? You all agree?
Correct, most definitely.
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll do that. Any other questions, concerns, or comments about the director's report? And it's a little difficult to elaborate or get into the nitty gritty of what he presented because we don't have them as action items. So maybe it's something for the future to consider. Maybe we put them under action so we can handle these things a little differently. If it's just like telling us that you met at a meeting, maybe those are okay, but anything that might require a little bit more in-depth discussion or action by the board, you might separate it, take it out of here and put it into the meat of the agenda.
Well, one of the things that, President, I agree with you, because as these items are placed, if they're part of his report, many times they're not listed as an item, so there's no backup information for that item. And we do need the backup information to clarify any questions we might have. So I totally agree with you. You remove some of these items that he has in the director's report, place them as an action or no action. We should have more backup information to make decisions, at least informed decisions.
Especially when there's money involved, right?
Correct.
Okay. Very good. Any other comments, concerns, or can we move on to the next item?
Just to clarify, on the report, it just mentioned the Noche de Paz, so I attached the flyer that we got from the city on the Noche de Paz.
But it's not on the action.
It's a part of my report on the flyer. We're sponsoring this, and this is what they put out in there's been some questions in the past about sponsorship levels. It's talk about the Santa Claus sponsor at $5,000, the Ranger sponsor at $3,000, the Bingo Bill sponsor at $1,500, and the sponsorship forms and all that.
Right, but that can't be on your report. You need to put it for us to take action on it. You can't just.
Let's see.
Okay, but I don't know what action we'll take. We're just a sponsor. In other words,
Well, we're gonna cut a check.
everything is being done by the city, and they have a committee, Parks and Rec is really.
Are we letting go of any money towards the city?
Yes.
Then
So
we need to
then we
take
need to have a report on it.
action. Anytime we're gonna cut a check for anything, we need to take
Just,
action.
even if we're sponsored, we need to know what's
I would
going on.
say that, right?
No, you're right.
I agree. I agree. But let me ask Mr. Cuellar, what's your reasoning or knowledge, or what's the purpose behind not putting it as an agenda item?
Well, we've discussed it before because, I think at one meeting, Mr. Rafona showed up to discuss the presentation of what they were planning, because we have no say-so in saying, well, change this and change that.
Well, we could say no.
Yes, we have the option of saying yes or no. That's why we present them and ask them, show us what you're doing. They showed us who the music was, they showed us when it's gonna be and where and all that, and we have the option of saying yes or no. But like there was some discussion at one or two of our meetings that some of the board members didn't like the promoter that the city hired. And the city said, well, that's who we hired. And so we have no say-so about that because.
That we
And
understand.
we
but-
understand.
So we have discussed this before at the meetings and then we decided to go ahead and be a sponsor.
But when there's money gonna be involved, that we're cutting out a check, I like to see what we're gonna
How much
do
is-
for,
how
how
much
much
is
we're
this,
gonna give
uh,
them.
how much is the bucket we're gonna give them?
How much we're gonna approve, and for that fact, if we have sponsors that are sponsoring us to give to the city, I'd like to know what they are. Because we can't just, if we say no, we're not giving any money, that's up to the city. They have to come up with the money. If this board says, no, we're not getting sponsoring, that's it. But I'd like to know where our money's going to and how it's going to it. And where is we're gonna go ahead and sponsor to. Whether it's the Jingle Bells, the Santa Claus, the sled, the snow, I don't care. We need to know.
Those are the sponsorship levels the city is promoting for general sponsors.
Right.
We're like a major sponsor and we budgeted money to give to the city and told them, when we discussed this during the budget process, we budgeted $30,000
Right.
and told the city, it's up to you to decide how you're gonna split it between the 4th of July and the Noche de Paz.
No, sir.
That's
No,
what-
sir. No,
I
no,
think
no.
we agree, I think we agree.
Sir,
No, no,
I'm just
no,
telling you,
no.
and we just showed you that you were not at the meeting when we discussed this, how can you say no?
Oye,
Well,
pero-
excuse
That's what we
me,
discussed.
before we go off on a tangent, this is not items on this meeting for discussion or to take action on. So we're giving you guidance, anytime we're gonna cut checks like that, or there's gonna be monies dispersed from this organization, let's put it as an action item on the agenda, okay?
Okay.
So right now, there's nothing going until we approve it. I would say that's the proper way to do it.
I agree.
Okay.
Is there, let me ask you this, Mr. President, is there any other item here on his report that requires us to have this discussion in reference to? Because this is how I'm seeing this, he's telling us what he's done and what he's going to do. Okay, and if you have any questions, ask now.
Right,
When it
like-
requires money,
Number one, I attended two directors' meetings. To me, that's okay. You can put that in the report. We had a ribbon cutting. You know, you're just telling us facts. But anytime there's any type of negotiation or money going to be considered, that needs to be on an action item, okay? And then this board needs to vote. I think that's the way we all understand this, right?
correct, sir. Do you see any other one here that?
Not off the top. I saw the Chick-fil-A, Golden Chick, but it is on our agenda, so we can get to that when we get there. Great. Can we move on to number 5? Our financial report?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion. Have you finished the director's report, or,
We're not on action items right now.
okay, so,
Right now, we're on, he just gave us the
Are we
report.
waiting
Now
for
we're going to
somebody?
number 5, financial report.
financial report.
Are you waiting for your girl or something?
Go ahead, Mr. Cueto.
We have some financial documents there. Basically, it shows the expenditure for the month. We have, what you were showing me, Mr. Lester, the other one, yes, that's the reports that we got from the city, that's our bookkeeping for June, July, and August, okay? And they're still doing September, so we reported the last meeting, they hadn't done anything since May, so we finally got June, July. They're not in your packet because we got them after the packets went out. So all we did in the packet was a summary of what has been spent in the last month of what came in. And I attached a one-page, deal that shows allocation payment detail. That shows what came in sales tax to the city. And it shows that in this month, the city got 287,070.72, and we get 1/4 of that as part of our revenue.
For the record, board members, I did, Mr. Cueto, about making it a habit to put this every meeting that we have, at least every new month, to include this in our package automatically, so we can see the revenues coming in and coming out.
Thank you.
So the ones that were passed out that were not in here, we'll put them in your packet formally for your next meeting, and hopefully by then we'll have a September one, so we'll have the complete year-end report. We have not gotten the report since.
Okay. Any comments, concerns? Report, can we move on to the next item? The next item on the agenda, we're now on our action items.
May I be recognized, Mr. President?
Mr. Go ahead.
I'd like to entertain a motion to go into executive session to consider the employment evaluation of our executive director at this moment, please.
Let's take that motion.
We've got a motion and a second, now discussion, I would rather wait till our attorney gets here, if that would be okay with you guys. I think that would be critical to have him in there. He said he's on his way.
When he gets here, we go into it?
That'll be fine, if that's okay. Are you okay with that?
I'm fine.
Very good.
Excuse me, I need to do that.
Okay. Then we'll go to number one, it's discussion, consideration, possible action, if any, in adopting and or revising amendments as discussed by the San Juan EDC board. It's our bylaws.
The attorney was
And
working.
the attorney is not here, so can we table this until he gets here?
Table.
We'll pass on it, right, till he gets here. So number two is discussion, consideration, possible action, if any, on existing travel policy as it relates to the San Juan EDC staff and board of directors, and or creating travel policy as it relates to San Juan EDC staff and board of directors. Documents attached. Want to elaborate, Mr. Flores?
Yes, I was asked by the board president to submit a copy of what our current travel policy is, and it shows it there. It has some funds, personal policy manual logo at the top of it. It's a two-page document, has page 6 on it, and the next page 7. And then I was asked to maybe consider some amendments or changes. So I've drafted something that's typed differently, and it says San Juan County Development Travel Policy as a draft. And I don't know, it's not urgent, we don't have any trips coming up anytime soon. If you all want to take it, study it, and maybe make recommendations to add or subtract from the proposed changes, maybe put on a subsequent agenda for action.
What prompted us to put this on the agenda, board members, was that there was a trip taken by some of our board members to Houston. I think it was a TML conference. At the end of the trip, there was some reconciliation issues. There was some monies that were supposed to be reimbursed to the corporation that hadn't. There was no time frame. There was no guidelines for us to follow as to how to fix that. So we said, well, we need some type of structure. So I said, I'm sure the city has a travel policy. Well, why don't you start there? So I guess that's how you got to this one.
Yes.
Mr. Arbona, is this the policy that you all use for the
Yes,
city?
as far as I can see, it is a travel policy.
Do you see any problem with the EDC using the same policy?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, the EDC can always, that would be whatever the policy the city has. So if it is the wish of, the board, you guys can use the same policy we turn back.
I think it makes perfect sense because, like, my understanding that we use your finance director and your auditor and everybody else to review our books. So why change it?
The board took action, and I don't remember the date, but we took action to approve the city's policy as our policy. That's what we're following now. But in reviewing this, there was some concern that it was not specific enough as to how much time people have to fill out the forms and get reconciled, what's covered and what's not covered. That's why we were trying to expand on it a little bit, to cover some things that were not in here. And most of it here is almost exclusively designed for staff. And I had asked the finance director of the city if they had different policies that apply to elected officials when they go on trips for the city. He said, no, everybody uses the same policy.
Same policy.
Yes.
And if I may, I'm sorry, one of the things that is advantageous for you guys to set the same policy we currently have is that we're currently working in improving or redoing our policies. So this is gonna come from a very reputable company that's already been approved. And we're in the initial stages of dialogue with this company. We're gonna start off with the first meeting, and then after we'll start meeting with the staff. So once this is all been done, pretty much all of the policies, employee benefits and whatnot, it's going to be included. So at that point, you guys can also, adhere to it.
What time frame? When do you anticipate that
We're
to be
looking at
finalized?
anywhere between 3 to 4 months to finish.
Then I think that it makes perfect sense for us to wait till they're finished with their document and then adopt. We can move to see we want to
So
adopt.
then right
the
now,
same
would
thing
we,
that they're doing.
would we have to do a motion, or since we're already following something, wouldn't we just keep continuing?
Right, we
following in
can
place?
decide on the agenda to discuss and take action on whatever we want to do. So right now, Mr. Cueva has stated that we already adopted using the city's policies in the past. I was not aware of that. Was that before me?
Yes, sir.
That was before me.
And this is, just so you know, the study that the city is currently conducting is a comprehensive plan, which is a oral comprehensive plan for pretty much every different policy.
Mr. Gerardo, you opened this item as this came about because of the last trip.
Right.
So you requested this item to be on the agenda?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You obviously spoke to him. Okay. At that point, you didn't notify him that we had already adopted?
Yes, and he asked me for a copy, and I sent him a copy of the city policy.
He just said he didn't.
No, I was under the impression we did not have a policy at all. It's the first time here that we did, that we had adopted the city. I did not know that. Now, when I'm seeing this here on the agenda, I'm thinking that this is to adopt it today. I did not know that.
That's
this was-
exactly why I'm puzzled here. What are we doing here? Because I was in that meeting, and I remember there was questions about us adopting what the city had, because the city's policy is geared towards staff personnel, not towards elected officials or members, board members. So we've been through all this once. Now, why it's not on a EDC letterhead as this, that could be addressed, saying we should have had travel policies as EDC policies, not necessarily, oh, we use the same as the city, right? And I can see your point out, but we've been through this.
There were a couple of things in here that are not covered. I don't know if your update is gonna be covering or not. There were questions about, do we require receipts for taxis or for, do we require receipts on parking, things like that. And so that's why there was an attempt to expand a little bit on it.
Do you expect to get a little bit more detailed with respect
Yes,
to
and sometimes we already spoke to the consultants about those issues, and all of that is going to be implemented into the new policy.
how about a time frame to reconcile after you have traveled to make sure you submitted all your receipts?
Our normal practice at the city has always been immediately afterwards. 2 to 3 working days after. That's our normal practice.
Have all of our issues here with the board members that traveled, has everything been reconciled already?
Yes, sir.
Mr. President, can you let the record show that, legal counsel's here?
Yes, for the record, we've got Gilbert, now present.
Sorry.
And to catch you up, Mr. Counselor, we are on action item number 2, which is a travel policy. And we just discussed that this EDC had adopted to use the city's travel policy before I was here. And Mr. Arjona just shared with us that the city is currently working with a private entity to revise their policies. So I think at this point in time, it makes perfect sense for them to finish the work that they're gonna do, and then us see what we can adopt as they work.
I have a question on the travel policy, meals per section, right? So if it's from Tuesday to of that time that we went to Dallas, to the 10th of November. But if you're already over there on Tuesday morning, does your breakfast meal that? Because I mean, if you leave here, you're driving, you're not gonna eat
I
it.
believe the policy states, if the class starts on Wednesday, it's from whenever the class starts on. So if you leave on Monday, you leave on Sunday, you're on your own.
Yeah, but
Policy, Tuesday is not a day, it's not a travel day, because actually, the policy states that you can take off on
the
Wednesday.
hotel is rented on the evening.
The Wednesday, well, I might be wrong, but
Yeah.
Wednesday, the class starts at noon. So you got travel time.
So when is your hotel rented?
Okay, you can, it doesn't matter that your class
You gotta leave
starts
home,
on Wednesday.
No, you
So-
don't leave home on Wednesday because the hotel was rented
No,
on
no,
Tuesday.
what I'm talking about, your class starts Wednesday, that's when they adopt.
So you're gonna eat no meals all day Tuesday because you gotta be there
You're on
Tuesday?
your own on Tuesday.
So what is your question, sir?
What is your meal allowance
Is it for Tuesday?
That would be
You're
part of your
asking
travel.
on a particular day of travel, You're asking for the
Tuesday.
time that you're leaving,
In other
whatever day
words,
it might be.
Our hotel is rented for Tuesday, right? You're not gonna leave here no 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock to be there Tuesday evening, or 9 o'clock in the
All
evening.
depends on if it's at the island.
Yeah,
If someone's
but
far.
I'm talking about Dallas. It's not good city because you guys flew, so y'all were already there. You fly.
Oh, so you're talking about a specific trip,
Yes,
not just in general?
Dallas, a specific trip.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So you have a question about that trip?
That trip, because if you drive and they take your meal out, but they pay you the lunch and the dinner, but they didn't pay you breakfast. Well, there was only two of us that drove that day.
What
The rest
happened
of
once
them
on
didn't
that
drive.
line? You prepared that travel?
Yeah, yes.
I didn't see his travel package.
Let me suggest something. That's why I remember, discussing this, and we should have had something titled San Juan Economic Development Corporation Travel Policy, because if you notice that if you read under allowance expenses per diem, there was a difference of opinion, and we voted on increasing the amount of per diem compared to the city. So now, this is the first time I see what is presented. It's current to the change that we had back at that meeting. So, you weren't, Mr. President, at that meeting, but there was a lot of discussion in reference to, as board members, what we think is fair if we're going to travel. Case in point is what Mr. Navarro is talking about. It could become lengthy. How to adjust to at least something we're all gonna agree to. The last time we discussed this, it wasn't that we're gonna follow exactly what the city had in reference to the regime, especially that. I remember that issue. So I don't know if you guys wanna spend time in adjusting this right now, or do you wanna table it, look over it, and then bring it back as an agenda item to take action? We do know now that there will be some revisions done, because at that point, we had discussed how Alamo, their rates, I mean, we even had, rates per diem from Alamo, I think from another city, we compared, they were compared, we're able to compare, so my suggestion
Well,
is.
thank you for the information, and for the record, today is the first time that I hear that this EDC had adopted the city's policies, and this is also the first time that now you're telling me that they're different, that the per diem is different from the EDC, so.
Yes,
Yeah.
from the
So
city,
now we're all
yeah.
over the place, and we need to know what we have.
So that's what my case, what I was trying to say, it was just trying to say, hey, I was over there driving, I got there for Tuesday, I'm ready to do what I'm supposed to do for EDC, but I didn't get the breakfast meal.
And basically, your day should have started.
Started on Tuesday.
So I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the consensus is
Well, I just wanted to be.
to go ahead and wait for the city to take action on what they're gonna do, and so that we can consider what they adopted to see if we are interested. But for the time being, we need to be real clear on where we're at.
But at the same
Well,
time,
right.
we're still covered under the city's,
Well,
we're following your
No,
policy, right?
no, guys, let's not get confused here. We're not, Mr. Garcia, we're not going to follow their policy. The last time we
Well,
met.
to a certain,
Hold on, but their policy is their policy. The last time we met, we put together a policy using theirs,
Yes.
and this is the first time I see it.
So we need to make sure we understand.
policy you discussed? We discussed the policy, it's the first time I see it, and you see the
no,
difference
and the
here.
reason I was saying is you said you're gonna take about 2-3 months, that's why we're still covered
There
under.
were some
No,
differences.
it has nothing to do with it, we have our own.
Yeah, no, I know, but on the additional stuff, it's still missing.
Can you get together with Mr. Contreras and some of the other board members to figure out what the actual policy is today?
The question that, getting back to Mr. Navarro, the question is, when we were trying to coordinate and ask people, like, in your case, you flew, we said, this is your flight, this is when you're leaving. And he said he was driving, so we gave him per diem for the travel day. But we assumed he was leaving, mid-morning, so he was provided per diem for lunch and dinner. He said he left way earlier, so I said, well, if you had told us that, we would have included breakfast, but we didn't know what time you were leaving.
But you could
And
probably
so-
still submit it after the fact.
And that's what I told him, and that's what I told him.
It is a 9-hour drive.
That's what I told him, I said, submit it and we'll
I think
be.
the full day should have been covered.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question. What you just said right now, if Mr. Navarro would have provided that information, you would have complied with his request. Where is that here? Because that's how these policies work. It's not a matter of, well, you know what, I think you should have breakfast, Navarro. No, is it here that you should have breakfast?
The thing is,
That's what I'm talking
Full
about.
day should have been covered.
Well, again, if
I'm going with
it's
the
here.
policy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not about whether
Whether
it's
you're
or not.
assume or don't assume.
That's
what I'm talking about.
Okay, so let me just, elaborate on what we just discussed here. So Mr. Cueva put this on the agenda at my request, because I was not aware that we had anything in place. So this was for consideration, so obviously this is out the door, because we already have something in place that was acted by a prior board
Yes.
several months or years ago, I don't know when it was. But we need to find out what that is and then present it to us so we can all know where we're at. I mean, it's just almost silly to me that we're even here.
And I can attest that it's never been presented to us, at least in meetings that I've been, okay? This is the first time I see this, and what I've heard earlier was that Mr. Cuellar put this in here to present to us as part of the item for the.
That was gonna be his suggestion, right?
A suggestion, it wasn't, the way it was presented, Mr. Cuellar, is not, Mr. Ojardo, Board President, this is our policy, no. I suggest this. You can't suggest something that we've already discussed and approved.
The first 2 pages in here was what is in place now, but I was told it was inadequate and to submit some suggested recommendations, and that's what the next 2 pages are.
So, can you get together, Mr. Contreras, and figure out what our current policy is?
Yes.
And then share it with the rest of us at the next meeting, so we can all know what our policy is?
Yes.
And,
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, if I'm not mistaken, the current policy is what the city has.
With the exception of the per diem rate.
Any other changes that were done afterwards have to be approved by the commission. And that has to be done.
Oh, okay,
So that's what I'm saying, it's what's in the city.
okay.
So if you're gonna make any changes as far as the per diem, they need to come before the commission for approval.
Okay.
I don't think we adopted your policy. I think we came up with our own, right?
Well, that's what he's saying now, that they're not valid until you make it.
So it sounds like we're back at the city, right?
Yes. So let me just, this is what I'm saying. If it was approved here, that the per diem was gonna change, it has to come before the commission for approval. It hasn't been approved by the commission, then we're still at the city's policy.
To your knowledge, it hasn't gone before the city.
It was just something I'm not doing.
Let me ask this question. And it's a stupid question, but how is it that you know this? As far as, what we discussed, approved at this level is not, cannot take place until it's approved by the city. How is it that you know that?
That's the common practice, I guess.
It's a common practice, or it's due to the city charter because the EDC, is an extension of the city, and the city is the one who approves the budget according to what the EDC presents, yes or no, right? Yes, okay. So what my point is, Mr. Quaid, why didn't you ever present our changes?
When we discussed this at our meeting, our attorney, Rick Palacio, said that it was a policy up to this board and did not require further approval by anybody else as a policy.
And the EDC is not an extension of the city. We're independent of the city. So the law is always, we need to make sure we say that, okay? No. But the bylaws have to be approved by the city commission. I think that's what Mr. Orjona is saying. So this policy can fall within our bylaws, but as far as our policies here on how we do certain things, they don't have to go to the city commission. The bylaws have to be approved by the commission. And that's where this would fall into.
Sorry to interrupt you here, but I can assure you this is not in our bylaws.
Yeah, no, it's not.
So-
That's what I'm saying. We should incorporate it into our bylaws, and then that would be taken to our city
You
commission.
know, addition to that, at the end of the day, although we might not be considered as an extension, but they're definitely responsible for us, and that's why they approve the budget, commission.
And that's what the law says. They only have to approve our budget, but they are not allowed to tell us what to do. They have to approve our expenditures and our budget, but they're not allowed to tell you, you will fund this project, you will fund the costas. They can't tell you that, but they control the budget. So in essence, they
Yeah,
control.
because if I may-
Yeah, but that's what the law says.
They can always say, no, we're not.
Yeah, exactly.
So we still need them.
We brought this up back in May when, and Mrs. Sanchez back then, remember she got all upset because we had gone to the additional cost on our,
She was talking about it, this item is.
and it went, yeah, and it went, and I know that you were, back then you were at our meetings and so did Mr. Adams. And I know that she got upset that, but yes, Mr. Palacio did say, no, guys, You all can, so we went by the recommendation of Mr. Palacios, and
he just told you the same.
that's why, and that, no, so I'm trying to bring up part of it, because the president's here, but yes, we had,
That's the
and
reason why it was done.
And I think, I talked to Mr. Wahadlo earlier today, and I think it makes sense, and like the mayor said, you make it part of your bylaws, and whenever I'm not here tomorrow, or Mr. Wahadlo's not here tomorrow, or you're not here, it's in the bylaws, and that way we know what our policies are.
And that was gonna be the plan today, to adopt them into our bylaws, since we are changing our bylaws. If we reached an agreement on the travel policy, which obviously wasn't done in the past, it wasn't attached to the bylaws.
No. What we had discussed was an amendment, a recommended amendment to the bylaws requiring that we have a written policy, but not actually incorporating all of the policies into the bylaws. That was what we're talking about. In other words, right now, we're not required to have a written policy. So we were gonna try and write that into the bylaws saying you must have a written policy, but not include the actual text of the policies in the bylaws.
Yeah, cause it got pretty confusing. Once you hit the road, I mean, it just.
Let me ask you
can't
this.
assume, you know.
Let me ask you this, for the individuals that were here before this current board, what policy was in place?
Generally, if there were any questions, they would just follow what the city did. That's what we would do. We talked about this earlier also, Mr. Waddle and I. For hiring practices, well, we don't have to follow the city policies, but there was always a question, did we adopt them, did we not? And then finally everybody said yes, so we would just follow what the city would do. We'd put it in the paper and go from there.
But it was never in our actual bylaws in writing that.
No, but there was always a question, because we would have prior board members who would say, but we adopted city policies. No, we didn't. Yes, we did. So we would just say, well, we'll just go with that. We'll just go with the city policies. That's what the problem.
That's bad practice, right? We need to make sure, we need to reflect it in our bylaws.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna suggest, as an item, not necessarily right now.
So right now, so to finish this off, we're still on the travel policy issue. So we can take no action, wait see what the city's gonna do. We can recertify that we are under the city's policy by adopting it again, by re-voting on it, so we can all understand that that's what we're following today, or we can do none of the above. What are the wishes of the board?
I just want to make it known that regardless of what we decide on today, it's not a matter of, I think it should, we need to refer back to whatever the bylaws are and the policy. The policy is.
Bylaws? Our bylaws or?
No, the policy is gonna be incorporated into the bylaws.
yeah, could we continue doing it as we've been doing it, and then as soon as how Mr. Juan, before you got here, had stated that maybe it was gonna take 2 to 3 months to, now that they're doing their overhaul of it, and then we could bring it back to the table,
I think
Mr.
that's a good
President?
idea. I think we're all under the impression now that we are following the city's policies. But let's wait till they're finished with theirs, then we can also
And then bring it back.
add the written policy to our bylaws that we are following whatever we adopt, whatever they adopted. And it'll be real clear for everybody for the future, right? Good. So then no action is required today. We'll move on to the next item, discussion.
Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
Can my motion be recognized at this time, since Mr. Vasquez is here?
Yes, sir. We had a motion and a second, to proceed to executive session as soon as you, joined us, Mr. Vasquez.
Oh.
So, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We'll move on to executive session right now, and it is 6:14.
Mark, did you see what time we went into executive session?
It was 6:15.
Sitting great.
That's what, Mr. President said.
7:15.
After 6:15.
Yeah, it was 6, I was, yeah, it was 7.
It was 6:14, but okay, 6:15.
Okay, we had left off on number 3.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, we, discussing, consideration on, any change on the format of the EDC minutes. There's no, Mr. Cuellar, do you want, or anybody have questions on this format of?
This was a recommendation from our president, he says that's how the county does their minutes. And that we do audio, video recordings of all the minutes, of all the meetings, and he said that according to the law, that suffices. And then when people ask for it, we give them the CD of the whole minute, not just what we wrote up. And I think you researched it also.
You need a motion?
Any questions or motion, gentlemen?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Okay, there's been a motion and a second that we go ahead and approve, the format, recognized by our president, Fajardo. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Next item. Discuss, possible action, any action setting the EDC meeting dates for November and December, basically, okay, we said that November.
Okay, we talked about the 22nd, right, and we said we were gonna.
And we're still gonna go with
I can't, the 22nd, man, I got
about
the.
21st.
I got the 24th, man. Oh, yeah, you know what? I can do the 21st. I can do the 21st, it's a real short.
But that's gonna be a short meeting, right? There's only gonna be
One item.
one or two items at the
Yeah,
moment.
at the most.
How's everybody, is gonna do it?
Time, just time, what time, guys? I'm good.
5 o'clock? 5:30?
Whatever time you guys.
5:30, because I got that class.
5:30?
5:30.
So then it would be 5:30 on the November, on the
21st.
November 21st.
Can we discuss December already?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
No, I'm open any day besides the 22nd, 25th.
The 21st, you don't have?
December 21st, you want to?
No, we're talking about December, oh, okay, we're talking now December, okay, November's the.
Pick a day, cause I don't even have, I don't have anything scheduled yet, so pick a day and I'll make time around it.
Are we talking about December?
Yeah, pick a day, Ruben.
Wow, I mean, I'm good with any day you want.
You want the first week, Mr. Contreras, of December?
December 7th?
December 7th? Working day. Hey, I'm working.
No, 14?
Yeah, 14, I'm good.
14?
I'm good.
14, 5:30.
I'm good.
Isn't that what we're gonna have our Christmas dinner?
I'm good.
5:30.
5:30.
For EDC, isn't that when we're supposed to have a Christmas dinner?
I haven't heard.
I haven't
I know,
heard anything
I
about
know
that.
Thanksgiving's around the corner. Y'all wanna have, is the city having something for all employees and all board members, or must employees and city staff?
Are you on the good list or the bad?
Yeah, that's what I wanted. Am I on the good list or the bad list?
No, that's for employees and boards.
I'm still
Maybe-
wondering when Turkey
You
Day.
think, we can make something for the EDC, a little
For
premium
Christmas.
for Christmas? On there? What do you think?
Want to?
Guys, just a little something here?
Okay. So you want to include it at that meeting?
Yeah, let's do it.
14th.
The 14th.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Ruben, how
Are
are you
we
with
gonna
the
invite the
14th?
city manager and everybody?
Yeah, they're invited.
Yeah, we should invite the commission.
Absolutely.
Hey,
Jesse, Jesse, make sure you bring the commission, your wife.
Correct.
Your wife should invite you.
No, not
Make
just
sure you
you.
bring your wife.
Yeah, the mayor and the
On the
commissioners.
14th.
All the
Yes,
commission.
yes, the mayor and the commissioners.
December 14th.
Correct.
And the whole commission?
Yes.
Yeah, the whole commission.
They are our lead, they're the ones that got us.
Yeah, correct.
5:30 still good, or they?
I'm fine with 5:30.
And you know what, let's.
So then you all wanna do the 14th for December and still at 5:30
Yes, sir.
Correct.
For what?
Might as well.
For our next meeting?
for that next
No,
meeting,
that's the December meeting.
the December meeting. That would also be that meal for the Christmas.
What do we want, okay, what do we want as a meal, so.
December, well, we're trying to first, let's get the date and that for
And you'll be the ones, everybody.
So for now, there's 2 dates set, right? We have one already in November, which
November
is the
21st
21st.
and then December the 14th. And they're both at 5:30, right?
Yes,
Correct.
Okay, and now we can, on the one of the 14th, you wanna do a meal and we're gonna invite all.
The commissioners, all our commissioners, mayor and,
Here's the meal.
and of course, we're having a meal.
Us,
so-
but we're gonna have
A wife.
all our commission.
Commission, yeah, they can bring their wives.
Yeah.
Can bring their wives.
Okay.
Right?
And those, okay,
I
do
don't
I have?
bring my wife.
Well, you can bring the girlfriend, or the boyfriend.
Or.
Como decía Johnny, just don't bring both.
Yeah,
It's gonna be here?
Yeah, well, where,
Well, where's everybody?
We'll put some, we'll get some, think about it.
Right here, there's, look at how many are here, times
What do you wanna do?
We still
Then
have
plus
another
another-
one.
Why don't we find out how much it costs to rent the little place? Next door, yeah.
Suggestion, there's a suggestion that so that way, cause think about it, guys, right now there's 8 of us here.
Right.
Our wives, that's 16. We invite our commission, that's another 5, that's another 10. How about, Mr. Rodriguez just said, how about Rancho Grande, and we sit down in the meeting room?
In the meeting room in the back. Everybody knows Bobby, so.
Or which one did you recommend? Next door, también tienen aquí el restaurante.
And they'll make anything we want to.
You want to make anything that we
It's
want?
up to you all.
What do you think, Mayor?
What I think is, let's just stick to the dates and times, and in details, we'll discuss at next meeting, and then we'll have the staff present to
On the
us their
7th, we're here.
ideas. The 21st.
That's what the 21st. We'll discuss it, yeah, I'm
Okay. So I make a motion to approve the dates and times for the
I
next
second
meeting.
that motion.
Who's gonna be Santa Claus?
Okay, the motion and second has been made that we're gonna go ahead and for our next meeting is November the 21st at 5:30. And then the meeting in December will be on the 14th, also at 5:30. With that being said, do I have a show of all those in favor, say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries, and we got our meeting set for that. Okay. Okay. Consider action on sponsorship for the Rose Game of the meetings. I want Mr. Cuellar, you wanna bring us up to speed on this?
This was submitted to us by the Basilica. We were one of their sponsors last year. I think last year we paid $3,000 and we got, I think 6 tickets to some of the board members attended. And they brought us a request for consideration for this year. And it shows you in the packet information you have there the different levels that they have. I know last time we discussed it at length and it was decided to go ahead and participate, and we paid $3,000 last year. We were a bronze sponsor.
Go ahead.
Well,
What's the deadline?
again, I'm just gonna bring up to par what things that have happened before, I know we all, more than half of us attend that mass here at this, church. And then this decision here, again, this is just my opinion, this decision here, whatever it does, the ones that are gonna take it the hardest, if we don't do anything to at least help this organization, the ones that are gonna get it the worst is our city manager and our commissioners. Because it's happened years ago, one time in something that we finally had to go do something to just get the head priest to where you could get off the EDC director.
They can take the leakage.
But we just don't wanna give, I think you all have enough headaches and not for something like this. So yeah, gentlemen, we need to consider.
You know what, I just make a motion that we give them $3,000 again.
There's been a motion and a second that we go ahead and go with the bronze sponsorship for
There's no
$3,000.
Right,
Yes, sir.
you can open the discussion.
Open for discussion.
Discussion.
Okay, I just, in my eyes, I just don't see it. I mean, I know that it's good to get to the church and stuff, but I mean, I think we're just burning like the money there, and we can utilize it in a more positive, more way in other areas for our businesses. So, I'm just recommending that.
Because, and again, we're gonna go.
Let me say something, and I kind of agree with you, Ruben, the only thing is, church does carry a lot of people, and a lot of people that represent the city of San Juan. When we do help them out, they know that we help out. If we don't, man, we're gonna be shooting ourselves in the foot. And there will be out there, and these priests, the Catholic Church carries a lot of parque.
And they do bring people in.
What was the deciding factor at last year's meeting and discussion was, basically, they're the biggest tourist draw in town, and this is a promotional item. On the logo, on the bronze sponsor, it says we get company logo on the dinner program, event signage, and the local newspaper ad, so it's advertising where we get credit as a promotional item.
Cool. And this is the focal point of San Juan, so
And the only thing I think is that if we do sponsor something, I know it's hard in the holidays, guys, but we need to, if we pay for a table, we need to at least try to show up. Then it makes it seem like we're throwing our money away.
Is anybody gonna go, period? It's enough of like $3,000, it's not anybody.
Well, last year, all the times that I've been, I mean, we've given, I've never gone.
I wasn't there last year.
I've never gone.
When is this
I
again?
just don't.
But I do give them the,
It's in January,
because of the.
January 27th.
I prefer to wait until every time and something else that they come up with, or they're doing other things that they need some donations of, maybe that, but this year, I think a lot of it, I think it's just money thrown away. I mean, others.
Just for clarification, because it's not for a table, that would cost us $5,000 for 10 people. It's only for 6 tickets. In other words, they put us at the table with other people. Because that's what happened last time, and last time I think, Dolores, I think, wound up going, and Eddie Rodriguez, and I forget who else, but the tickets were used last year.
And they were sitting,
6
yeah,
people?
they were just scattered with it, wherever there was room, they were sitting them.
Yeah, because it's not for a table, it's only for 6 tickets.
I didn't attend, it was raining, so I didn't attend it.
What is this thing though, Mr. Cole? I haven't heard anything, I don't know what it is.
It's, the first thing they're gonna check.
It's a fundraiser. It's a fancy
Yeah, Mr.
fundraiser.
The first thing they're gonna check, they're gonna see you got your wallet with you and your pay, check.
That's an option.
Yeah, that's what it is, it's a big auction, and then they have a dinner and a presentation, but it's basically a
Let-
big.
let me
So
tell
where
you
does the
some-
church make
Hold on, let me tell you something else about, the relationship between the city and the church. It's a two-way street, it's not a one-way. I mean, the church grounds have had issues with infrastructure, and the city's been there to
All the
assist them.
time.
So it's not necessarily, we're gonna be ousted of San Juan, which you are the city, right? But because the church is unhappy with us, come on, I mean,
No.
don't paint it that way, because that's not the way it is.
I'm not-
I do agree that, given the fact that it is the number one attraction in this whole area, we should be some way,
Generous.
maybe indirectly, directly involved, but we do have to consider, but that's just my 2 cents.
What was that lease amount over there?
3,000.
That's the lease, the minimum?
I remember, I think when you had just first come in, right, Ben, that they had that big water bill issue that was right before you came in. They finally.
I mean, it's quotes, right, whatever goes.
There was discussion. Yeah, I make the motion.
I make the motion already, so just put it to a vote and see what happens. I want to get out of
There's
here.
been a motion and a second, then we
And that
go
was
ahead
the
and go
lease,
with
right?
that.
That's
The $3,000.
I don't think they'll take any less. Can we give them any less?
1,500.
We're just gonna give it to them.
Nobody's going. Go back to it. There was a motion and a second that we go ahead and, sponsor the 3,000 of bronze. All those in favor of the motion signify by aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nice.
Okay.
Well, we tried this. Number 7, we have taken care of already.
Now I know where I was
Number
at.
6, Chief? 6.
Number 7 being no action. 8, what are y'all gonna do with that? Move to golden chick?
Have you all done 6 for?
No, you're number 6.
No action.
Oh, sorry.
Golden chicken, no action.
Oh, we haven't done.
What do we do number 6?
No,
They haven't
number
done
6
the
is, okay, possible action, any authorizing the EDC executive director to obtain prices and quotes on a vehicle for the EDC. Mr. Oscar Cuellar, would you like to bring us up to, on that?
This item was placed on the agenda, the request of 2 board members, and they were asking about, the general everyday practice of, running errands and picking things up and all that. We are currently using private vehicles and getting mileage. And they asked me to put this on the agenda. My recommendation was, if the board's gonna consider it, we look at going through an existing public entity provider like HGAC or Byborg or somebody, rather than actually speccing it out and bidding it out, if that's what the board wants to do. But at this point, it's just discussion. We're not at any point yet on a no vehicle or ETE or anything like that.
Mr. Cuellar, do you get a car allowance?
Yes, sir. I get
And
$200
and the mileage is being submitted by whom?
by the two staff, Martha or Erica, when they go deliver packets or go to Walmart or go to City Hall or the post office.
I know we don't have anything in our bylaws, but do we have a policy that states that we reimburse mileage?
I believe it's in the policy, yes, sir.
City policies.
Yes.
Again, have they been adopted or have they not? Can you show me where they've been adopted?
I'll find you the minutes, but they were adopted at a meeting.
'Cause I don't remember discussing it again. I have missed meetings, I can tell you that, Mr. Cuellar, but I don't remember us discussing policy where, maybe you all remember, where we reimburse people for mileage, staff for mileage. I'm not saying I'm against it, all I'm saying is, if we're gonna be fair, we're gonna be fair in reference to follow policies and bylaws. Across the board. Do you remember anything else?
No, I wasn't.
At the meeting, I believe it was Chris, and it was when Adriana was president of the board at the library, when we discussed it.
Well, I would say I'd like for Mr. Cuellar to provide us with the minutes on where those policies were adopted, so we can refer to that.
I'd like to make a motion to table it at this time.
A second.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second that we go ahead and table item number 6 at this time. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Were you raising your hand, Mr. Nord?
No.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, number 7 we had taken care of, number 8 we had taken care of. Basically, that was, improvement.
Number 9, we're gonna need a motion for you to take your evaluations home, take them and bring them back at the next meeting.
Oh, okay. Number 9, we had discussed it.
It's in here, right, the evaluation? The evaluation?
Where it is back here. Very back. The last sheet.
I had a question in reference to the evaluation. Who provided this evaluation?
This is a standard form used by the city. I got it from,
That's human resource?
Yes.
Mr. Ahmad, this is the evaluation that's utilized for all directors?
This is the one utilized for all directors, the one for myself and the city secretary, different one, just to use it.
Why are we putting, it's the city of San Juan?
Basically, we have an MOU with the city to do our HR workforce, and so we use a lot of their forms, standard forms, instead of creating our own.
So, in other words, when it's legal-wise, we would have to put EDC, council.
Well, you're fine, you could do that, but like you said, we have an MOU where the HR is handled by the city.
Okay, you're on what MOU means.
Oh, I'm sorry, memorandum of understanding.
All right, thank you, sir.
Now, the MOU, there should have been a discussion and action items.
Yes, because I don't know some of these.
No, you could question when and if it did happen, because unfortunately, many times we just function and operate on assumptions. We don't know what's there. I've never seen that MOU. It's an actual document that the EDC will operate according to that department. So, have you seen it?
In the past, it was approved, it was a 1-year contract, and every year we take it to the city commission to approve between the EDC and the city. I don't know if it was done this last time.
Has it been approved?
I don't recall.
If it hasn't been approved, Mr. Navarro, then it's not active.
There was an item on the agenda to amend it, and it didn't get amended.
The MOU, the question Mr. Navarro had was to begin with, why is this document titled City of San Juan, right? Mr. Cuellar's response is, we have an MOU, okay? And that is basically an umbrella to cover us. But a document that had to have been discussed and approved by both the city commission, and not together, but in that level, and the EDC, right? It has to be approved, and then it has to be renewed every year. So if it doesn't get renewed, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Vasquez, then it's not valid.
Right now, we're still paying them monthly, right? Pursuant to that contract.
Yes.
So Ben owes the EDC money.
There was an item on the agenda, Mr. Arjona, I don't remember what month, but it was Commissioner Garza was still with the city, where you tried to amend it from $1,000 to $1,500, and the city commission voted to keep it at 1,000. And so that was the only last time I remember that was on the agenda for the EDC, for MOU.
The city decided for 15.
Let me refresh some of you guys' memory, and this will trigger it. Remember the understanding in reference to the accountant of how much he was gonna get paid this year? Okay, that's the MOU. That's the MOU, that's the memo of understanding. But we, as a board, are going to agree that this is our understanding. City's asking to get reimbursed for the accounting work.
For their service.
The services, this is what we agreed to. Okay, so, do you all remember when we did that? Okay.
Yeah, that's when he came and asked us for the raise and said, even if he
Yeah.
came and brought us a receipt, we owed him so much.
And then we were supposed to get some reimbursement because of some work we never done.
Now, we're talking about the accounting services. Was the HR included? I was just using it as an example.
Yeah.
That we had spoken about the services provided.
Are we still paying that accountant?
It covers,
A lot less.
it covers accounting, doing payroll, and insurance, because we're covered by the city's insurance, so all that's in that MOU.
The MOU covered the HR, the accounting part of it, and then at that time, the accountant, the finance director, this week came back to you all, asking for additional monies, and it was supposed to have been an MOU drafted, and I don't recall that I was.
Well, he was asking for additional money because, the understanding was the check was going to the city, not what the city did with it,
And
not
that's
directly to
that
them,
was
that was
Instead,
what
he
it
sent
was.
us a nasty email.
Yeah, remember?
Yeah.
We approved 1,500, but
Because he came and told us you
decided
won't low.
it was gonna be up to the city to
Correct.
decide.
Yeah.
How he was gonna get paid.
Okay, well, that was just the definition of the MOU.
Okay, well, I got it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cordero. You opened up something else.
Is this the performance review that was used to acquire?
No.
We created another one.
I'm learning. I'm learning.
This one for staff, but not the executive director.
Well, I don't remember what the director did. He did it on his own. The board didn't evaluate the staff. The board only evaluated the director. And we used to do.
Yeah, but they would, do the scan.
With that said, guys, with that said, right here, guys, with that said, that was another lead up into what my point was, who from the board decided that this would be a tool to use for his evaluation.
No, I think they just went with what the city had.
Or he or they?
No, I think he went, I think Mr. Freya, it went,
And we,
you're following up after the city on it.
let's say for instance, my position, there's a way that I get evaluated. And this is actually spearheaded by the mayor. So in this case, that's what I was asking Mr. Council. Was this the one that was used to acquire executive directors? Yes or no? So you as a board, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Council, this is something that the board comes up with a questionnaire together? And then this is what how he or she gets rated?
That's how we've done it in the past. The board would create it or say, I approve this item, and then give it to the board that day. They'd come back at a different time.
Now, I'm not saying that this cannot be used, but then again, issues say, we can always change it. Someone is, if you wish to use this type of thing.
Well, see, we weren't given that option to begin with. That's my point here. Unless somebody had input in this as board members.
No,
you all have input.
Moving?
I didn't put it in for, I said, just take it out.
How did you go about getting this evaluation?
I requested it from HR, from Ms. Cordero.
Standard policy.
No, sir.
Well, no,
No.
he went by the chain, he went to.
Mr. Arjona just explained what was practiced before and his situation, correct?
Mine and the city secretary.
6 years.
Because
if you.
Okay, is there anything that we need to do with the evaluation, or what do you suggest?
All I'm saying is bring it to light how this occurred, and aside from that,
If you like what I can do, for members, what I can do is we can give you a copy of what we have for me and the.
and we decide which to use.
And then you guys can take off or whatever, and I can email it to Mr. Cuellar, Mr. Cuellar can email it to you all. And then, you'll decide what's what and what to take off.
In our next meeting, which we'll
Yes.
we'll bring in the evaluation tool that we decide to use. And we'll proceed with our next meeting that night.
What do you think?
You can do that. Okay. Thank you. Almost made me flip another one. So that I make the motion for, as discussed, Mr. Arjona will provide board members along with the attorney and staff, Mr. Cuellar, an additional evaluation tool.
Second.
And we'll bring that to our next meeting.
Just for clarification, I'll provide it to Mr. Cuellar.
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Cuellar will send it to you all.
So then you're gonna get an evaluation till the next meeting, decide that's when you're gonna use, and then leave it another day, and then come back another day? with the evaluation?
No, we have one. Mr. Cuellar is going to provide us what Mr. Arjona will provide him, and we make our own decision on which to utilize and bring that into the next meeting.
Just have another.
Yes.
That's stuff.
Again, what?
Hey, he's being observant, he's good.
We're meeting the 21st. Well, it has to be before. Well, the meeting's already set.
Yeah, but that's about it, he said, gives us at least 2
The
days.
sooner the better. The sooner the better.
Yeah, so we would have to get that paperwork no later than Monday for us.
We'll get you the information tomorrow morning.
Okay, there's been the motion that has been made by Mr. Cabrera and second by Fred, that we go ahead and,
As discussed.
That's okay.
as discussed, for this motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Motion is carried.
Should be it.
So now, we finished everything in the executive.
Number 10.
Number 10.
Number 10 has to do with threat litigation. Is this, are you gonna wanna make a motion to have him present to you, or what is ultimately the wishes?
I thought the discussion was to provide you as much documentation as you can first.
bring him in?
And then schedule it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so,
This was discussed in executive session, so shouldn't the motion be, I make the motion in executive session. I make the motion as discussed in executive session.
I second.
There's been a motion by Mr. Contreras, second by Mr. Israel Garza. So we go ahead and proceed as discussed in executive session, item number 10. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Move it.
I already said it.
Motion is carried.
I already did it.
So I have a motion to
Adjourn. Yeah.
So moved.
Thank you.
I made the motion and.
And Mr. Garza.
Okay.
No, I didn't.